Dr. L. Randall Wray was available today, and I wanted to do one of our rare long-form conversations where he and I will have a conversation throughout this hour. And if you have questions for Dr. Wray, feel free to call in. And I want to talk about macro and microeconomics. Too many people in this country just don't have a clue about economics. And so I want to get into this stuff with Dr. Wray. He's a professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, a senior scholar at the Levy Economics Institute, the author of the book Modern Money Theory, and the website that he and Stephanie Kelton and a number of other really brilliant people post at, neweconomicperspectives.org. And Dr. Wray, welcome back to the program.
Hi, Tom. Glad to be back. And I think I've heard that you have a new book.
I do. Yeah, The Crash of 2016.
I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Well, thank you. The premise of the book basically is that the protections that the leftover New Deal protections that kept our economy from collapsing were dismantled in the late 2000s with Gramm-Leach-Bliley Commodity Futures Modernization Act and others, this deregulation mania, and thus we haven't fixed our economy yet, and so we are still in the crash of 2007, and we're just simply reinflating a new bubble. Your thoughts on that?
I think that's absolutely right. I think the dismantling probably began a bit before that. But yeah, I agree. I can't see how we can actually get a good recovery going until we restore some of those protections. We might stumble along, but I don't see a good recovery for most Americans until we get new versions of the New Deal. I don't think we can just go back and pull exactly the same thing back online, but we need something.
Well, Glass-Steagall was pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it was. I think that we definitely need to carve out a part of the financial system that used to be called commercial banks and make those things very safe, very regulated in the way that Glass-Steagall did that, and protect them. And we should not be protecting the whole rest of the financial system. Much of it is engaging in, just basically fraud, as my colleague Bill Black says. That shouldn't be permitted at all. But
or gambling to be charitable.
Yeah, but there is a place in the system for rich folks who want to gamble away their money and give it to Goldman Sachs and let them gamble it away. I think that's fine, but we shouldn't be protecting them or Goldman Sachs at all.
Right, I'm totally with you. And the commercial banks you're talking about are basically the places where average people have their checkbook and their savings. So let's talk about economics for a few minutes, and how economics works and where we're at, and should we be hysterical about the current federal debt or the deficit? Should we be concerned about the balance of trade payments, our trade imbalances? Should we be concerned about private sector debt? To what extent has somebody been playing the old professional magician game, watch my right hand while my left hand picks your pocket? To what extent has that been going on? And let's start at the beginning. What is it that makes an economy work?
Yeah. Well, the thing that it just amazes me is if you take courses in economics all the way through the graduate school, in an average mainstream university in the United States, you're always told money doesn't matter. They focus only on the so-called real things. Money is supposed to determine only prices, and it doesn't really affect any behavior. But suddenly, when we turn to programs that are really important for most people, say Social Security, for example, or if we talk about the trade balance, as you mentioned, suddenly they all focus on only the money things. And so they say Social Security is broke. Why? Because when they project the money revenues and the money spending from here to eternity, and literally that is what they do, they say, we're $200 trillion short. But that's not the way to analyze Social Security. Social Security is a case where really We need to look at the real things. Will we be able to take care of retirees in the year 2050 or whatever in terms of real stuff that they need, medical care, housing, food, and all that? And, by any reasonable projection, by anyone who's not, a complete quack, the answer is yes, of course we will. We're going to be much more productive than we are now. We'll be able to take care of them in real terms. So here, looking at the money things gets you exactly the wrong answer. And I would say, for the most part, that's also true of our trade balance. So they see more dollars flowing out of the U.S. than dollars flowing in. But hey, we issue the dollar. The rest of the world wants to hold some of that. Okay, fine. If you look at the real stuff, we get more real stuff coming in than we export. So they're looking at the money thing again, mostly gives you the wrong answer. However, of course, there is a problem. When Americans lose their jobs because of imports, we don't put them to work. But if you ask, well, why don't we put them to work to do something else? The answer is, oh, Uncle Sam can't afford that. He ran out of money. So again, it's the money. Looking at the money gives you the wrong answer on all these kind of macro questions.
So what should we be looking at?
We should be looking at, how much can we as a nation produce, plus how much can we as a nation import from the rest of the world that wants to accumulate dollars in order to improve American living standards. And, I'm sympathetic to arguments about the environment and all that, so I'm not talking about, everybody needs 4 cars or anything like that. What I'm talking about, we need to decide, how could we improve American living standards? I think most of it is going to be what John Kenneth Galbraith, called public consumption. That is, consuming, in a sense, parks and public transportation and things like that. But when you start talking that way, they say, well, where will the money come from? We couldn't possibly afford, say, a high-speed train system like China already has because America is broke. Well, that's nonsense. We've got probably 25 million people who would love to have a full-time job. Why don't we put them to work? So we have the real resources. I think nobody questions that.
Well, we don't, because every effort to even have a modest public works program or a public infrastructure bill gets filibustered by Republicans.
Yes, right.
Who hold this bizarre ideology of austerity.
Yeah.
And without politicizing it too much, I don't know how political you want to get. In fact, let's keep this more in the abstract. We're talking with Dr. L. Randall Wray, a professor of economics, University of Missouri, Kansas City, and senior scholar at the Levy Economics Institute, author of Modern Money Theory, neweconomicperspectives.org.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Stick around. We'll be back in just a moment with more of Dr. Wray. Welcome back. We're talking with Dr. L. Randall Wray, professor of economics at the University of Missouri and Kansas City, and senior scholar at the Levy Economics Institute. So you were saying but you could just kind of pick up where you left off, I guess.
Well, so we need to put our resources to work, and Uncle Sam, as the currency issuer, we've been saying this for about 20 years now as we developed what came to be called modern money theory. Which wasn't quite our choice, but we've been pushing this idea, and now you see people at the Fed, you see some policymakers, you see Alan Greenspan saying, yeah, that's true. Uncle Sam cannot run out of money. He issues the currency, and if you want an easy way to think about how Uncle Sam spends, he spends by keystrokes. He keystrokes bank accounts.
Right, but then people say, but what about the German hyperinflation?
Yep, I know. Can Uncle Sam credit too many bank accounts? Yeah, he could. Do I believe that that is a danger? No, I don't. And no one in their right mind claims that the U.S. is in any foreseeable future, and I mean literally any foreseeable future, anything like the Weimar Republic. Germany lost World War I. It's not a good thing to lose a world war. And then the Allies, actually against the American objections, demanded reparations payments in gold. Germany had to export virtually all of their output in order to earn the gold to pay the reparations. Keynes warned when they first formulated the reparation payment plan that this was going to be a disaster.
In fact, Keynes warned that it would create the next Great World War.
Yeah.
He was right.
The economic and political disaster, that's right. So, and then people will talk about Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe had civil war, and they...
Right. They also had a disastrous agricultural policy by just breaking up the white-owned farms and then letting people from the cities who had absolutely no experience with agriculture take them over, and they just literally didn't know what they were doing. I mean,
and so do we see this in our future? I don't see this. And so you look at the hyperinflation cases; they don't bear any resemblance whatsoever to any modern developed Western nation. I can't see it happening. Our danger, as many prominent mainstream economists say, our danger is possibly deflation, not inflation. And deflation, it might not sound bad to have prices go down, but historically, even fairly minor deflation is a real disaster for capitalist economies.
And deflation is where money becomes more and more dear, less and less available.
Yeah, and it's becoming more valuable in terms of what it can buy, and so you have a very strong incentive to sock it away in hoards, not spending it, which of course then makes things worse because firms have to lay off employees. In the Great Depression, prices in the U.S. fell by 25%, and it was really a disaster.
Okay. We'll be back with more of Dr. L. Randall Wray in just a moment. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Dr. L. Randall Wray is with us, professor of economics, author of Modern Money Theory, blogs over at neweconomicperspectives.org. Dr. Wray, you were saying, actually, we have a couple of callers who have questions. Do you mind if we'll just pop them in from time to time here? Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. You're on the air with Dr. Wray.
Thank you. Yes, two questions. Number one, what's your opinion, Dr. Wray, of David Suzuki's assessment of the modern Harvard economics point of view that it's a form of insanity? And number two, how do you see the future economy all over the world, for that matter, in terms of ending cannabis prohibition and allowing farmers to help, replenish the Earth's surface and the economy?
Okay, the insanity of Harvard economics.
Apparently, David Suzuki criticized modern money theory, according to that caller. I don't know.
Oh, I don't know. I was interpreting him as a critique of mainstream macro, which
it may well have been. Yeah.
Has really, really failed us. I think it was flawed from the very beginning, but it clearly failed us, and that none of those guys saw the crisis coming. In fact, they did their best to bring it on. People like Larry Summers.
Yeah.
So, I think that the incarceration rates in the United States are just a tremendous economic drag on the country, and I think that we need to change policies and stop sending nonviolent people to prison. That's my view.
Yeah, we have a prison industrial complex and we have a military industrial complex that seems to be, between the two of them, sucking up a disproportionate number of lives and dollars. Is that an economic issue or a political/moral issue, or both?
I think that it is both. I don't remember, almost 20 years ago, I did do research on the growing prison industrial system, and I argued that it's not likely that this is going to be a net positive for the economy. Just looking at this strictly from economics, not from morals, that locking people up and trying to have production inside prisons, just because of the logistics and the negative impacts on people who go to prison, that makes them virtually unemployable outside prison, that there was no way that this was going to be a positive thing for the economy.
How do you respond to when John Boehner or one of these other guys says we can't extend unemployment benefits for another 5 months because Paul Ryan said our social safety net has become a hammock, or we can't. There was a $32 billion bill to help vets and open 30 some odd new veterans clinics around the country and help the VA get out of the hole that they're in. It got filibustered by Republicans in the Senate who said that it would bust the budget. We couldn't afford it. We can't afford that kind of a $32 billion addition to our national debt. Mm-hmm. What's your response to that?
Well, again, it's looking at the wrong thing. If we were giving unemployment benefits to the unemployed, and the problem was our economy was already straining its capacity so that we couldn't produce more for them, then you could say, well, we can't afford it in terms of the real stuff they're going to buy. But clearly that's not the case. Everybody's operating below capacity, and that is why we have massive unemployment. So giving unemployment benefits to the unemployed and giving more anti-poverty income to the poor is going to help the economy because it's going to provide sales. Now, I prefer jobs over unemployment benefits.
Right. Well, that's FDR said the same thing. He said the best unemployment or the best welfare program is a job, and he went out and made the government the employer of last resort.
That's right.
CCC, WPA.
And we've done the math on this, and if you give, and I'm not recommending this, I want to make it clear. Worst case scenario, you give people minimum wage jobs. You give one minimum wage job per poor family, full-time job. You eliminate 2/3 of all poverty. Imagine what you would do if you paid them above minimum wage. So our poverty problem is an unemployment problem.
Wow. And my understanding is that the reason why this administration is promoting $10.10 an hour is that just for the currently employed minimum wage workers, most of them qualify for government benefits.
Yeah.
And in fact, that has become the business model that the fast food industry and the big box industry uses, is have all the rest of us taxpayers subsidize the employees of these people. And if you kicked it up to $10.10 an hour, in most states, those people would no longer qualify for benefits, and the employer would have to actually pay them well enough that they could live.
Yeah, food stamps is the biggest program, and now, of course, we have medical care. So, yeah, we need to give people jobs. If someone works full-time, they shouldn't need benefits. They should be able to afford food, shelter, clothing, and health care.
Right. So how do we give people jobs?
Well, we need a variety of programs. There is no one program that fits everyone. But where I start, and I think all the modern money theory people start, is with the basic job guarantee program. You want to offer a job to anyone who's ready and willing to work at a basic wage. I would prefer to start, let's say, at the over $10 an hour and gradually increase it over time, because we need to raise the wages at the bottom to tackle that part of our inequality problem. Then we need to do something at the top too.
Well, also wages at the bottom, correct me if I'm wrong, they are the drivers for demand, aren't they?
Well, in the bottom half of the income distribution, people basically don't save anything. They can't.
Right. And all that spending then creates demand for more goods.
Yep.
We'll be back. We've got to take a break here. We're a 6-minute break for the news at the bottom of the hour. We'll be back in 5 or 6 minutes with Dr. L. Randall Wray, professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. The website, neweconomicperspectives.org.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Dr. L. Randall Wray, professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, senior scholar at the Levy Economics Institute, the author of Modern Money Theory, and blogging at neweconomicperspectives.org, is on the line with us. Dr. Wray, what are the biggest? Actually, let me just go back to something you wrote here. This. In your pro-distribution or redistribution, the Piketty moment, etc., you said that we can tax the rich and we can help the poor, but combining the two makes it harder to get to a help the poor policy. Tell me what you mean.
Well, first, we do not need to tax the rich in order to help the poor. And, that is obvious once you understand that the federal government spends by crediting bank accounts. It doesn't actually, take a wheelbarrow up to the house of the rich and ask for all their gold coins so that they can go spend those on the poor. It just doesn't work that way. You didn't see the rich asking the Uncle Sam to tax them in order to, invade Iraq or something like that. So it's very clear we don't need to raise taxes in order to spend on the poor. Raising taxes is, a very difficult issue in the United States, no matter who you're raising the taxes on. And so why would you want to link a very beneficial program helping the poor and providing jobs to unemployed people who want to work with another program, even if it had 50% support? Why risk the program that would help the poor by linking it to something that's completely unnecessary and unrelated to helping the poor?
Right.
I'm all for taxing the rich. Okay, people didn't understand that in my post. I was just saying, why link the two?
Yeah, which makes perfect sense. In other words, we can. It's not our debt we have to worry about. It's our poverty and our unemployment that we have to worry about. And so let's do something about that. When we came out of World War II, we were far more in debt as a percentage of GDP than we are now. And we didn't cut our way to prosperity. We spent our way to prosperity with public works programs like the Eisenhower International Highways or Transcontinental Highway System and things like that.
And we were in a very different situation in World War II, of course, in that we were beyond full employment of resources. Right now, there's even much less reason to raise taxes to spend on the poor than there was to raise taxes to spend on the war.
Right. I'm curious.
We were at full employment and in danger of having inflation, so we used things like rationing instead.
Right. I'm curious your take on Larry Beinhardt's work. He found that he went back and looked at the United States over 100 years, and then at several other European countries or other countries, and found that whenever the top tax rate, the top marginal tax, we're not talking about taxes on just average working people, but on rich people, after roughly $2 to $3 million in annual income, when that top tax rate was above 50%, the economy was stable, in some cases for periods as long as 2 generations, from 1935 to the 1980s. When that top tax rate, however, went below 50%, then the economy immediately goes into cycles of boom and bust and boom and bust and boom and bust, bubble pop, bubble pop, bubble pop. And he theorized that the reason for this is that if money beyond the first million or two or three that you make a year, if the extra money beyond that becomes dear, becomes hard to get, then you tend to be more conservative in your investments, and you tend to, keep the money in the businesses, grow the businesses, that kind of thing. Whereas when large amounts of money come really easily, when the top tax rate gets dropped down to 30%, 28% Reagan took it to, then and the next year we had the biggest crash since the Great Depression. That what happens is that all this hot money starts flooding into the marketplaces, looking for the most speculative high returns they can get. Because after all, it's almost like it's free money. What the hell? And the consequence of that is massive instability. And he makes the case that the top marginal tax rate should always be above 50%, not because we need the money, but simply because it stabilizes economies. What do you think about that?
Well, correlations don't show you the causation.
Sure.
And I don't doubt all the latter part of your comment. When you have high concentration of income and wealth, you're going to have a very unstable economy. And the reason is because the bottom 90% of the population doesn't have enough income to keep the real part of your economy pumping along, creating jobs and producing stuff to sell, because the people at the top just aren't consuming enough. I think that part is true. The thing that I'm skeptical of is that it's the 50% tax rate that does this. I think here is my own version of what's happened in the U.S. post-war period, that we had lots of things that constrained income at the top as we came out of World War II. Tax rates were high, but the effective tax rate, the tax rate actually paid by people at the top, was nowhere near as high as people believed that it was. But what happened was we not only, started reducing the tax rate, but we got rid of all those things that prevented people at the top from getting the kinds of rewards they're getting now. And that as inequality increased, we moved farther and farther away from anything you would want to call it.
What are those things? What kinds of things?
Well, we had constraints on what the people at the top could earn. We had a very small financial system, and
we couldn't executives could not be compensated with stock options.
Yes.
That changed in the 80s under the Reagan administration.
That's right, and there just what you had to get rich basically in the real part of the economy.
Right.
Now you're getting rich in the financial part of the economy, which in some ways is much easier to do through creative accounting and fraud and the blood-sucking vampire squids and all that.
Right.
Where
right. This is not a good thing.
The rewards are basically anything you want them to be.
Yeah.
Whereas back in the 1950s, when the financial system had been destroyed in the 1930s, all of this kind of behavior didn't exist. The financial system was almost an afterthought in our economy. It really didn't matter. Gradually over time, it became bigger and bigger and bigger until now it gets 40% of all corporate profits, 20% of value added. As a share of corporate profits is 4 times bigger than it used to be.
Yeah.
So now it is the financial system that drives the economy. And what we need to do is get back to a New Deal size of financial system, and that will prevent the gross inequalities of income that we've got now.
Right. Okay. I've got a whole bunch of people here who would love to ask you questions. Let's try to do these fairly quickly. Mario in Cicero, Illinois. You're on the air with Dr. Wray.
Hey, guys. How you doing? You already covered that raising the minimum wage would help the economy. Isn't it fair to say that if you raise them, there's a lot of pushback with big corporations who don't want to raise the minimum wage because they'll lose money. Shareholders won't take as much share as the money. Is it fair to say if they just raise the minimum wage and people make more money, the rich guys are going to get that money back anyways? Is that fair to say? In the form of sales or whatnot, the rich guys will get that money back anyways. They'll just part from that money temporarily, and then they'll just get it right back. Because everybody in my neighborhood, middle class, poor neighborhood, oh my God, we just have a list of things that we could spend that money on. So they'll just get the money right back. Is that fair assessment?
Yeah, I think you've discovered what we call the fallacy of composition. So every individual firm business person says, boy, if I increased my wages, my profits would be lower. But it's not true. If you increase everybody's wages, the profits are necessarily lower. So that's a fallacy of composition going from the individual firm, which obviously it would be true if they raised their wages and nobody else did, then it would hurt them. But if everyone's wages are going up, it doesn't hurt.
Which is why we do it with the minimum wage.
The minimum wage plus a job guarantee is how you increase the wages at the bottom.
Right. Eddie, we have a minute till the break. Eddie, a quick question for Dr. Wray?
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
From Redwood City, California?
Yes, thanks. Well, basically, in that question, what is MMT's view on income inequality? Dr. Wray has said in the past that basically the sovereign government can't run out of money, so it could always spend more on the poor without taxing the rich if it has the political will. So I'm wondering, can you explain how that kind of conflicts with this neoliberal austerity budget that we're running through every year in Congress?
Well, I think that there are people who are legitimately confused about this and think that Uncle Sam is like a household and he's got to balance his budget. As we know, and I guess you've read some of our stuff, that's just not true. Uncle Sam is nothing like a household. He issues the currency. Households are users of the currency. But I think that there's a much bigger agenda out there. There are people who just want to cut the social programs, so they use austerity in order to do that.
Yeah. So it's almost, that almost sounds like malice. We'll be back with Dr. L. Randall Wray, professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, senior scholar at the Levy Economics Institute, the author of the book Modern Money Theory. Right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And you can check out Dr. Wray's writings and those of many other brilliant economists over at neweconomicperspectives.org. And welcome back. We're talking with Dr. L. Randall Wray. Zachary in Chicago, you have a question for him?
Yes. My question was, is it possible, let's say, to increase the money supply by, let's say, $15 trillion and use $10 trillion to fix the infrastructure and use another $5 trillion to fix our energy crisis by investing in renewable technologies, which will create jobs and some actual product for this money, and what that effect on the economy will be?
Yeah. Remember, we need to think about our real resources. How many people could we put to work to build the infrastructure that we need? If we go back to the New Deal and the Great Depression, the unemployment rate was not as high. Was higher than it is now. But they put 8 million people to work in the WPA, and a lot of that was the infrastructure that you're talking about. So I don't think we need to say, let's spend $15 trillion. What we need to say is, how many people could we put to work right now today to start our infrastructure project? And then we do it at a pace at which we can find the resources to do it. The American Society of Engineers every year comes out with an estimate of the shortfall, and I don't know, it's $3 or $4 trillion right now, just to get all of our infrastructure into good shape. And then we need to spend some more for high-speed train systems and stuff like that. So I think that that's the way we go about doing it. And the same story on energy. We look at the resources we can use, plus resources we can import, and don't spend more money than we've got resources to buy. That's the trick. That's how you keep from sparking inflation.
So inflation is an imbalance. I always thought inflation was the consequence of an imbalance between important goods, and the demand for important goods and the availability of them. For example, the oil embargo in the 70s or the loss of food in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Well, what I'm saying is, when we get to full employment of all of our resources, if we continue to spend more and more, we will definitely get inflation.
Right.
Can we get inflation before that point? Yes, we can, as you just pointed out. When OPEC decided to increase the price of oil, we had massive unemployment at that time, and we still got inflation.
Right.
So you can get inflation before full employment, and the correct response to that is not austerity. It's to try to, in the case of oil, it would have been to find oil substitutes.
Which Jimmy Carter was doing, by the way, in the last 2 years of his presidency, quite aggressively.
Right. And it was successful. They basically they released natural gas, and suddenly natural gas was there, and the price of oil collapsed.
Right.
This time around, it's going to be harder. We're going to need sustainable energy. It's going to take longer, but that's the correct response to an oil embargo, or just right now with oil prices being manipulated.
So basically, we need to just forget about thinking in terms of trillions or dollars or budgets, and look in terms of resources. How many people need a job? What do we need done in this country? Let's match those things up.
That's right. We need a budget. Budgets serve useful purposes, but budgets are, it's a very loose way for planning.
Right.
The tighter way is what you're suggesting.
Resource is the human capital resource versus the demand for infrastructure needs or other things in our society. Yep. Dr. Wray will be right back. It's 20 minutes before that, or 10 minutes before that. Before the hour, Thom Hartmann here with you. Dr. L. Randall Wray with us, the author of the book Modern Money Theory, blogging at neweconomicperspectives.org, professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And Dr. Ray David in Springfield, Missouri has a question for you. David, you're on the air.
Thanks, Tom. Dr. Ray, the Fed has pumped a whole bunch of money out to the rich guys since 2007.
Yeah.
How much do you think they pumped out? Is all this money sloshing around the world a problem? And wouldn't we have been able to do a whole lot more if Congress had just spent some money?
Yeah. Well, if you look at what the Fed did in response to the financial crisis, they originated over $30 trillion in loans in order to help mostly the biggest international banks and a few major central banks, foreign central banks. That's not spending. Now, that is lending, and it's much different than fiscal policy. The basic problem here was that banks owed each other. And what the Fed did was said, well, here, we're going to lend you so you can pay each other. Okay? Should the Fed have done that? In my opinion, no. But did that money get out into the economy in the U.S. and around the world? No. After that, the Fed moved into QE, and here we're talking about $2 or $3 trillion more. Banks are just sitting there with excess reserves. What they did is they sold treasuries and mortgage-backed securities to the Fed in exchange for reserves. Can these dollars get out? No, they cannot. They're on the balance sheet of the Fed. And this.
So all of this is basically A, ineffective, and B, you got banks that are borrowing money from the Fed at 0.1%, and then they're buying treasuries that are paying 2%, and they're just sitting around taking the profits, and Jamie Dimon's paying himself $10 million a year. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I would say a while ago that characterization isn't too far off. But, the idea that you give banks more reserves and they're going to lend, it just completely misunderstands what banks do. Banks actually can't lend reserves except to each other. So the whole, on both sides, the critics of the Fed and also on the side of the Fed, they just unfortunately don't understand what they're talking about.
Right. So, again, we need to forget about the Fed policy and go back to what do we have in terms of human resources that are underutilized, and what do we have in terms of needs in our society that are unmet, and how can we bring these two things together? And frankly, that, according to the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, that's the job of Congress.
Yep, that's absolutely right. That's the right way to put it. The Fed has no way of spending money in a way that's going to create jobs and create sales for firms. The Fed can't do that. It has to come from Congress through the Treasury. It has to be fiscal policy, not monetary policy. Once the Fed had lowered the interest rate close to zero, there's nothing more the Fed.
What's the difference between fiscal policy and monetary policy? People hear those words, they have no idea what you're saying.
Okay, put it this way. This is shorthand. The Fed lends dollars. The Treasury spends dollars. It's much better to spend dollars into the economy because that increases people's
right. And the
income.
Treasury can only spend dollars if Congress appropriates them. The Fed can lend dollars in secret, which they've done to the tune of tens of trillions, but it has no effect on anybody other than the banksters.
Yep, pretty much that's
okay.
right. Yep.
All right. Sophia in Maysville, Kentucky. You're on the air with Dr. Ray.
Hello, Dr. Ray and Tom. Nice to talk to you. Thank you so much. I was interested in what you spoke about just a few minutes ago. I was at a wedding a while ago. Unfortunately, I don't remember this man's name or who or how. He identified himself as an investor who worked somewhat with the World Bank and the IMF, monitoring labor markets. And I don't know if you could call him a labor broker, but he said that the IMF and the World Bank, together with the wealthiest governments like the U.S. and the EU, were basically holding back and promoting austerity, not just because of greed, although greed, they're obviously taking advantage of that, but that if they allowed nations like the U.S., for example, to heavily invest in their infrastructure, there wouldn't be enough resources unless, of course, if we did it the same old way we've been doing, we'd have to go green. But even then, they were concerned that the lack of ability to keep up with demand because of increased demand because people have more money to spend would result in runaway inflation. And that's what he said. I just
it sounds like economic gibberish to me. Dr. Ray? Thank you, Sophia.
I think that there are individuals in all of those institutions you mentioned who do fear inflation. In spite of the fact that there are no inflationary pressures in the developed world, our pressures are deflation.
Which is dangerous stuff.
Yeah, there are people who think that because the Fed engaged in QE and the central banks of Japan and the UK and Europe are engaging in something similar to that somehow all those dollars will get out there, all those euros, all those pounds, and somehow create inflation. But they can't get out. And so they're looking at the balance sheet of the Fed, and they think somehow that's going to cause inflation. But there's no way that it can.
Because
they don't get out.
Because in other words, the Fed is locked into a continuous loop with the banks, back and forth, and to the extent to which it gets out might be the extent to which the banksters take high salaries and spend that on private jets and luxury homes, and that might put a few people to work, and so some little bit of it might leak out, but otherwise it doesn't. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and unless we've got U.S. households and firms and the same in other countries who want to go to the banks and borrow and spend. Okay,
right.
And right now, our households are still over-indebted from the last bubble that we had. It's just not likely. It's not plausible.
Are we in another bubble right now?
We have bubbles in several places. Commodities market is still in a tremendous bubble, and housing in some parts of the country are in bubbles. And I would say that that is in large part because people are unemployed. Someday these houses are going to be in demand, but right now there's a bubble created by investors who are paying cash, and they think that they're going to get renters and they're going to be landlords.
Plus, they're making derivatives out of those things.
Yep.
Dr. Ray, Dr. L. Randall Wray, neweconomicperspectives.org, the book Modern Money Theory. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, thanks a lot.